the Legal Defense Fund at Emory University School of Law, where she served as president of the Animal Legal Defense Fund student chapter for 2 years. In the summer of 2017, she then worked on the legal clerk for the litigation program. Alexandra lives in California with Winston and Anthony, 10-year-old pug with a big personality.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll let Winston know you got a shout out. I'm very thrilled. And I just want to say I'm really honored to be here today with such passionate and knowledgeable advocates and change makers. So it's really great to be here. So thank you very much. So today I'd like to talk about letters to litigation. How to use litigation and public participation to protect animals from wildlife services' cruel and indiscriminate practices. And I want to thank Rachel for mentioning in her opening remarks about Speak for Wolves and the objective to reform wildlife management and dismantle wildlife services. So just very briefly, today I'd like to give you an overview of wildlife services, an introduction to relevant state environmental laws, how these laws can be used for litigation, and finally, how these laws facilitate public participation and allow for our voices to be heard. So Wildlife Services is a federal government agency which uses taxpayer funds to kill millions of wild animals each year, using methods that are cruel and indiscriminate. A little bit about where Wildlife Service fits into the government. First, you have the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Within the USDA, you have the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS, and then within that branch you have Wildlife Services. Wildlife Services' mission is to, quote, resolve wildlife conflicts, but how this actually plays out is that Wildlife Services benefits ranchers, the fishing industry, and hunters. Because even from its inception, the focus has been on protecting crops and livestock, not wildlife. And as Haley and Amanda pointed out and showed, these wildlife conflicts are largely blown out of proportion. Some 2018 statistics from Wildlife Services. The number of animals killed, euthanized, or destroyed by Wildlife Services in 2018 was 2,704,018 animals. This number includes 357 gray or timber wolves, 68,653 coyotes, 106 of which were unintentional, 384 mountain lions, 9 of which were unintentional. So one of the ways in which Wildlife Services receives funding is through contracts with local counties. Instead of developing their own wildlife management plans and programs, they contract with Wildlife Services. This takes the form of 2 different types of contracts. First, they have a cooperative service agreement, which lasts for about a 5-year period, and as they claim, quote, addresses the need for managing conflicts caused by predators and other nuisance wildlife in the county. The second type of contract is an annual financial plan. This is where the county actually pays Wildlife Services for things such as personnel, travel, vehicles, supplies and materials, and equipment. The annual price tag for these contracts range from about $40,000 to $150,000 per year. And because these counties are state government agencies, there are certain laws that apply to them. The law that we've been focusing on is the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, and now 17 other states have similar sister statutes, as well as a national statute called National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And what CEQA and NEPA and the other statutes do are impose procedural requirements on agencies when they're making decisions that affect the environment. So while these laws don't direct the agency's ultimate decision, they do provide opportunities for public participation, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and agency accountability and transparency. So how CEQA and NEPA apply to Wildlife Service contracts? is that CEQA and its procedural requirements are triggered when an agency begins to consider a discretionary project. An example of a discretionary project is a contract with Wildlife Services for wildlife management. So if the county does have a contract with Wildlife Services, CEQA applies. And when we say CEQA applies, what does that mean? Well, it means that the agency must perform an initial study on the potential environmental impacts of the project. And if that study shows that there is no substantial evidence that the project may have a significant effect on the environment, the agency publishes a negative declaration. But if the study shows that the project may have a significant effect on the environment, the county can either, one, try to claim a CEQA exemption, which are listed out in CEQA, or two, they have to prepare an environmental impact report, which will indicate all the ways in which the project could affect the environment and must include mitigation measures, and also to consider alternative projects which would have less of an environmental impact. And throughout all these procedural requirements are opportunities for public participation. So how do we make sure that counties are complying with CEQA and when they're entering into contracts with Wildlife Services? That's through litigation. So first what we do is we submit a Freedom of Information Act request, or more accurately, a California Public Records Act request, since we're talking about California counties specifically. And what these requests can show are, one, if the county does have a contract with Wildlife Services, and if they do, see if the county did a CEQA analysis. If they did not do a CEQA analysis, or if they claimed an exemption to CEQA, that's when we're able to send a letter to the county. In this letter, we outline why the county needs to immediately suspend its contract with Wildlife Services and perform a CEQA review, or explain why the exemption they claimed is not applicable to this project, and our intent to sue if they refuse to do this. So if they do ignore the letter, then we have a potential lawsuit. What we can do is file a lawsuit alleging procedural injury under the Administrative Procedure Act, or APA. And once we do that, we've seen two possible outcomes. One, after we file the lawsuit, the county will settle and agree to suspend the contract with Wildlife Services and perform a CEQA analysis. Or they take it to court, where we can get a favorable outcome from a court ruling. So to briefly describe some of our successes with this litigation method, with the help of many coalition partners, including Project Coyote, Animal Welfare Institute, Center for Biological Diversity, Mountain Lion Foundation, Wild Earth Guardians, and Environmental Protection Information Center, we've been sending out records requests, sending demand letters to counties, and following through with litigation when necessary. So for example, in Shasta and Siskiyou County, both counties voluntarily suspended their contract after they received the coalition's demand letter. In Mendocino County, they agreed to settle the case after we filed the lawsuit and comply with CEQA. Right now, they currently released a draft environmental impact report, which they are accepting public comments on until this Monday, August 12th. And then we also had Monterey County, which brought our lawsuit to court, and the court found that the county did violate CEQA and ordered the county to void the notice of exemption and void the contract with Wildlife Services until a CEQA analysis was performed. So what we have from these cases is that the courts have and will uphold that, one, we have legal standing as our organizations and our members to bring these issues to court, and two, that these contracts with Wildlife Services do pose a significant impact on the environment. But even when we win, we're not reversing the agency's decision. We're requiring that they provide sound reasoning for their decisions and allow for public participation. So that's where we rely on you. For public participation, we're asking that people write letters and comments to these local counties. The public comment periods can be found right on the county's website, or by Googling CEQA.net, which is where any CEQA documents must be posted online. Also by attending public meetings. Again, these can be found on county websites, subscribing to county email alerts, and following any of the great organizations in our coalition. And what these opportunities do is they give us the chance to present the scientific evidence that Jill Fritz mentioned, that lethal predator control is not effective, and that non-lethal methods are more effective and less costly. And also to raise awareness. It's still ultimately up to wildlife services and other government agencies to decide what type of wildlife management program they want to administer. So procedural compliance with NEPA and CEQA does not guarantee that animals' lives will be spared. Only public pressure on these agencies will achieve that. So we want to be able to go out there and voice the science and the push for non-lethal management methods using scientific evidence. And I've left room for questions, and my email address if you have any.
So CEPA is sort of modeled after the national NEPA?
That's right.
Okay, so in NEPA, the first thing you have to do right out of the gate is scoping and what they call purpose statement. Having worked that a little bit, I noticed a lot of, you have to have a federal action representative for that to proceed with the law, basically. And a lot of times that's Corps of Engineers, or it's a Clean Water Act issue, or it's the Federal Highway Administration, it's the transportation project, or something of that nature. But what you find, and they're usually representing some sort of private entity, so it's a gas line, or it's a highway, or it's a shopping center, or something like that. And they want to know, but they have to do the NEPA, because that's part of the federal law. And that they have to figure out if there's going to be any impact or not. If there is, they have to do an environmental impact statement, just basically what you just said. But the first thing, what I'm getting at is the first thing about the purpose and need statement is that a lot of times these private entities that are going through this federal action agency are making it so narrow that it leaves the breadth of alternatives to be very, very exclusive. So my purpose and need is to kill wolves, basically. With X number of guns. That doesn't give you all the options for going out all the non-lethal. You sort of get my drift there. Is that, do you ever find that kind of a issue with these statements that you're working with?
Right, yeah, so a lot of the times the counties, when they're contracting with wildlife services, they're calling it an integrated wildlife management program. And so what we're requiring is that the CEQA review cover that whole program. Within that program, they do mention non-lethal methods and, kind of what was discussed earlier, they have to go through these check marks and, meet all these non-lethal before they can use lethal methods. So they are really kind of covering the whole program. And we do ensure at every step of the way that our comments are pushing those boundaries and to include more and more actions that might be considered under this entire program.
Have you seen any of the states wanting to follow suit after one federal decision, which is the expedited 2-year NEPA process, come through? Is CEQA looking to do a similar thing? Has any other states started to move towards an expedited NEPA?
That's a great question. Not that I'm aware of at this point. Yeah.
Several of us have formed a group, and we are actually attending our county commissioners meeting on this subject. And they are like clueless. So we have, gotten the Information Act requests to get the reports that they never bring to the meetings. Okay, so my question is, this is something that we have been real confused about, and since our county commissioners are equally confused, what is actually the relationship between the National Wildlife Services and our state wildlife services? We can't even figure out where the money's coming from, other than through the taxpayer, from the taxpayer somewhere.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's going to vary from state to state, and I don't have one specific answer for that. I think, doing the FOIA requests and kind of following the money is a great start, and I think a lot of, minds would join together to help with that.
Okay,
Yeah.
if I emailed you and sent you some of this information, could you give us some ideas on how we should proceed?
Yeah, I'd love to
Get
chat.
something stopped about this?
Right, yeah, well, we can definitely speak after this.
Okay, thank you. Idaho. It's Lee County in Idaho.
Well, that brings to mind, you say varies from state to state, so your specialty is California, correct? Or-
Yeah, we're a national organization, and right now we're focused on California.
Oh, okay, so because you're national, you'd be able to answer a question that I don't know.
What's the typical outcome when you do challenge a county? Do they go ahead and do their EIS, or do they just back off on the contract completely?
Yeah, so it kind of varies county to county. Some of the times they will, right after we send the initial letter outlining, our reasons for why they're violating CEQA and our intent to sue, they'll kind of back down and go through the CEQA process voluntarily. If we do challenge it in court, so far we've been successful in that the court agrees they need to do the CEQA analysis. I will say it's hard though, even if they go back and do the CEQA analysis and follow all the procedures, they're still able to, come out with the outcome that they're still able to have this contract, and they'll try to mitigate the environmental impact, but that they're still able to use legal methods. So that's why the public participation is so important, and the science, and to raise awareness and, really make them respond to our concerns. Yes?
How can we support you when the judges themselves are more and more contrary, environmentalists and workers and the public?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a tough one. What we're seeing, especially in the cases that we have brought in California, are that the judges, they don't have the ability to really say the county made the correct or the wrong choice. They can just look at the evidence and whether or not there's a probability that the program will have an effect on the environment, which the science is pretty clear that it does. So it's hard for judges, even if they have personal biases, to really contradict that evidence and to say that there's no environmental impact. So we've been lucky in court.
I'll make this one quick. How do we establish that we have standing in order to bring a lawsuit?
Yes.
Because that comes up all the time.
Yes, yeah, especially, in animal advocacy, it's hard to get standing. What our coalition members have found is that the court has upheld our organizational standing, saying that our mission is to protect the wildlife and the environment. So they've upheld organizational standing as well as standing of our members, and that we have the right to represent our members in court.
So you're always finding a representational individual in that county also?
That's right, yeah. So we either can do membership or organizational, so sometimes we don't even need an individual in that county.
It's a little different than what you just talked about, but do you want to mention the Forever Wild case and the recent
Sure, yeah, so one of
interesting about wolves?
Yeah, and it's been on my mind all day. So we also have a case called Forever Wild that is currently getting ready for trial. It's based in the District of Minnesota. And what it is it's a woman who has a kind of like a petting zoo of gray wolves, and then would also kill them and skin them and sell them for their fur. So what we're doing is we brought a lawsuit under the Endangered Species Act, saying that it was illegal to kill an endangered species. And we had a motion for summary judgment in court, where the court, one, rules that we had standing as ALDF, And then also a big win for us was that these wolves, the owner was claiming because they were hybrids, because they were bred with dogs many generations back, that they lost their endangered species status. And the court upheld that even though they were hybrids, they were still considered endangered. So now we're going to court to determine whether or not the owner actually killed them, and that will be in September.
How is she claiming she didn't kill them?
Yeah, yeah. The story changes every time. It seems like, part of it is, claiming that they died of natural causes or infighting. But at the rate that they are passing away and that she's selling pelts, the story doesn't really add up, which will be our argument in court. Yes.
So did she take them from the wild?
So right.
They're bred in captivity, right? You can't breed any safely.
Right, so they are, so what we're finding is that in a lot of our roadside zoo cases, even captive wildlife can be considered endangered under the Endangered Species Act, which is new precedent that we're setting. So they are considered, even though they're captive bred, as endangered. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. My name's Sean. Thanks for all your work. So I was just wondering on that lawsuit, if there's a way to be careful around the precedent with regard to wild fish and salmon, should be considered the same under the Endangered Species Act. That's something that you're familiar with and working on. So out here, we do a lot of kind of hatchery fish folks claim that they're the same thing as the wild salmon, and so therefore the protections would be weaker for the wild fish.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point, and I'd love to hear more about it after because it's not something that's on my radar. So, yeah, I'd definitely love to hear about that. But thank you all so much.